Hello and welcome to the final version of my Sashiko presentation. In my presentation, I'll talk about my research paper and the studio component of my project. I will get into the thesis and argumentation of my paper, and then I'll also talk about the aims of my studio portion and then the progress that I've been making with that. My thesis is Sashiko design and facture is directly related to the area or individual's access to economic resources and social standings. The 3 points of analysis that I will be making in my paper revolve around the design and technical differences in Sashiko. I will be looking at the materials that are used in Sashiko, the dye and color saturation, and then the patterns used, and the differences between high and low Sashiko. Rural, low class, and common people around the Nanbo area had limited access to economic resources, and they were also low class people during the Edo period. The materials that they had access to were coarse linen, hemp, and rami, and then if they could afford it, they could also use cotton, but most of the time cotton was a little bit too fine for them. The dye that they were allowed to use was gray, brown, and indigo, and it was typically in a light saturation. The patterns that the common people were allowed to use and were popular were the hemp leaf pattern, the hishi stitch, and the kogan pattern. The hemp leaf pattern symbolized the materials that they were allowed to use, which was the hemp leaf, and it also symbolized warmth during the winter months. And then the hishi stitch was used to fake a darker saturated dye. They would use 2 threads together, the dark thread to represent a dark saturated dye of the cloth, and then the white thread to represent the Sashiko pattern. Kogan was also particularly important for women in low class situations because they were required to learn it before they were married off, and if you wanted to marry well, you would know how to do the kogan stitch effectively. So an example of low class or limited access Sashiko was the Sohiki Bonten sled hauling vest, and this was around the 19th century. It's an example from the Tohoku area, which was culturally and economically isolated from Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka, which were the major populated areas of the time. The isolation, along with the harsh climate, made it hard for them to cultivate any sort of income, and their harvests were pretty poor, so this left them to limited access in supplies. So this vest was made out of bast fibers, which is a combination of hemp and rami. Cotton was a warmer material for them to use, but they had difficulty cultivating it in the area because of the harsh climate, so they couldn't afford to import these cotton fibers, so they were left to use bast fibers. And then you can see the Kogan pattern here, which was used to reinforce the areas that were damaged during working. So for urban, high-class, noble people, the materials that they were using were fine cotton and silk, and they were unrestricted for dyes, and they could use any colors they wanted, and it was typically dark in saturation, and this is typical in the Tsugaru area. Some of the patterns that were exclusive to the high-class people were the cross-circle shippo, the wachagi, the scaled weight, or the fundo, and then the linked mist, kasumi tsunagi. The cross-shippo wachigai was explicitly forbidden for common people to use. Um, and it and then the scaled weights was a common pattern for feudal lords, and they often would cast gold in this shape as well. Uh, and then the linked mist was also popular around Imperial Japan. So, an example of a higher class, higher quality Sashiko was the Emperor Shumu's Buddhist robe, Funzoe Keisa. I couldn't find a picture of the actual robe because it's in the Shosoin, the Imperial Repository in Nara, Japan. Um, it belonged to the emperor around the time when he abdicated his role and became a monk. The the robe was made out of a plain silk, and it was threaded with purple silk. So unlike commoner sashiko, they were meant to show off the stitches and the colors that they were allowed to use. So the studio component for my project will combine sashiko techniques with knit garments, and I will use materials to demonstrate the differences that I argued in my thesis. So this is a picture of the dye that I use plus a side-by-side between synthetic and natural material. In the synthetic material, I used that in the mitten, and you can see that it didn't take to the dye as well because it's a lower quality material. And then the natural material used in the sock took to the dye way better, and so you can kind of just see the difference between having access to higher quality material versus lower quality material and how that affects the dyeing process. For each item, I'm going to use different patterns. For the mitten, or the low quality material, I will be using the hemp leaf pattern, and this symbolized warmth for people in Edo, Japan, and it was important to them because it represented the hemp plant, which was used in a lot of the things that they made. I think it was fitting to use the hemp leaf for the mitten because it does symbolize warmth and it's a winter item. For the socks, I wanted to use a pattern that represented a higher quality and higher status sashiko. So I chose the scaled weights, or the fundo. And this was common for wealthy feudal lords, and they would use this pattern to cast gold ingots in the same shape. And this is some sashiko that I've been practicing. You can see each stitch, and I had to try and make each line straight, and this took a lot longer than I thought it would, so but it was an interesting process, and I'm excited to do more of the stitching in the final version of my project. And that's it. Thanks.